Welcome back to the leaderboard tutorial. We're going to continue from where we left off. We've got the basic leaderboard displaying nicely on the screen, but at the moment we have a text message saying press the screen or mouse button to start flashing over the leaderboard. So the first thing we're going to do is to sort that out. To do this, let's pop back into the game sprite and have a look. And you can see there's some nice variables at the top, again using variables to set numbers rather than just putting those numbers in the code. And I think if I set the scale of the text that I'm drawing to half the size it currently is, and if I move it to the left by 90 pixels, then now if I run it, that's better. So that's no longer going over the top of the high scores, which is great. So now I just need to sort out so that the high scores aren't displaying underneath the table there. So I've said that we can just go back to the high score sprite, and I've said I want to display 15 scores at a time. Let's go back to the initialization block. And I'm going to set another variable to say how many lines of the high score table we can display. I'll call that window lines. So variables, make a variable called window lines for this sprite only. As I can't stress this enough, it is so much better for your programs if you set these sort of the window top, the window left, things that you might want to change around, if you set them as variables rather than just putting the numbers directly into the code where you're using them. This is a much more flexible and neater technique and will reduce the number of errors and bugs that you get. So I'm going to set window lines to 15. And over in the Show High Scores section, instead of repeating for all of the scores, I'm just going to repeat window lines. And so now, when I run that code, I have a high score table that displays its first 15 scores very nicely. But there's lots of scores I can't see on that table. It would be very useful if I could set the index of the score that I wanted to appear right in the middle of the high score table. And to do that, I'm going to add another custom block. I'm just going to rearrange the code a bit to give me room to squeeze it in there. And I'm going to call this custom block set target index. So make a block set target index, and it's going to take a parameter of index. It's going to have no loops in here, so it doesn't need to be a without screen refresh. But the index I'm passing is what I want to appear in the middle of the table. So from that, I need to calculate what index will be at the top of the table. So I'm going to set another variable, and I'm going to call this target index to display at top. Nice long variable name. Target index to display at top clearly states what it's going to be for this sprite only, and I'm going to set that variable now. I want the index variable to be the high score that's in the middle of the table, or technically I want it halfway through the text of that index. If you imagine it's 16 pixels high, I want the 8th pixel down the middle to be in the middle of my table. So that is actually going to be an operator. It's going to be index plus half, or 0.5 is what I want in the middle of the table. And to put what's going to be at the top of the table, Windows lines is how many are being displayed. So half of that value will take me to the top of the table. So index plus half is going to be in the middle of the table. So if I take away from that window lines divided by 2, that gives me the index of what is going to be right at the top of the table. So now I need to update show high scores with this new value. So if I set index to the target index to display at the top, But you have to consider it can move up or down a pixel at a time. And so at certain positions, you might be able to see one sliding in at the top of the high score table. So I'm going to be on the safe side, I'm going to subtract 1 from this value. And it wants to be a whole value because it's an index that's used in lists. So I'm going to use floor, which takes off any fractional part, rounds a number down essentially. So floor of that -1 is the index I'm going to start at. And again, window top is going to be about the same, but it's going to be adjusted slightly because it can move a pixel at a time. So let's get the fractional amount being displayed, which is target index at top minus index, because I've taken off the fractional value in index. So that gives me the small fractional part, and the height of one line we know is window line height. So if I multiply the fractional part by window line height, and then add that to window top, that should give me the exact correct position to display it from. So window top plus the fraction a little bit. And as I said, I want to display 1 above the starting point just to make sure it's not scrolling on, and also 1 just below the bottom point to make sure it's not scrolling off the bottom. So I'm going to repeat by window lines plus 2. And to start this off, in initialize, I'm going to set the target index to 1. So hopefully that should put the very first score in the middle of our table. And there it is. But we don't really, I mean, that is exactly in the middle. That's really nicely done. But I'll just check. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 above it, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 below it. But obviously we don't want to show high scores of -6 to 0. So if we're showing 1, it's actually going to be at the top of the screen. We want to make sure that we're not showing any negative high scores. And it would look a bit silly if it was just blank at the top half. So that's quite an easy thing to fix. We'll go back over to set target index, and we'll just say, we'll put an if else in there. And the top half is going to be if the target has been set to a value less than 1. So target index is less than 1. Then we'll simply set it to 1, so it can't go smaller than that. So we'll set target index to 1. And then we'll have an if statement inside the else that says if it's greater than a certain value, because likewise, if we want to put the very score number 50 in the middle of the table, we don't want a blank block at the bottom of the screen. So if target index to display at top, there it is. If it's greater than, and the value will be high score number, which is the number of lines in the entire table, less, so high score number, less window lines -1, where window lines is the amount on the table, -1 because we're starting from the central value and we don't want to go below the bottom of the table. So subtract by window lines -1. And if it is greater than that value, then we need to set it to that value. So let's just copy or duplicate, put that in there. And now we'll set it going. And now we've chosen score 1, and it's put it right at the top, which is great. Let's experiment a bit. Let's change this value. So we're going to set to Well, we know we've got 50 high scores in the table, so let's set it to number 50. Let's run that. And 50 is right at the bottom, although you can see it is trying to display 51 there. So we need to put a check on that. But 50 has appeared correctly at the bottom, and just to check it works for all values, let's try 25. And then we have 25 is in the middle of the table. You might be wondering why it's not displaying any names at all, and I think we just need to reset the... No, we don't. In the reset, look, I'm still only updating high scores 1 and 2, even though we have 7 cloud variables now. But I actually put the code to set the cloud variables into a receiver, so I can just broadcast under there to update cloud. I don't need to do that manually anymore, so I can get rid of that code. Let's initialize the high score table, set it going, and there we have it. It's put the 25th score smack in the middle. It's drawing slightly underneath the bottom of the table, but it has to, because numbers want to scroll smoothly onto the top and smoothly off the bottom. Now at the top of the table, it's not a problem, because this high score has been stamped on top, so they're going to vanish behind there. At the bottom, that isn't the case. But we can make that the case just by updating the costume a little bit. So let's have a look at the costume. And the backdrop is this colour, and I'm going to want to draw a rectangle using that colour. So back into high scores, and it's got the right colour, it's got a rectangle. I don't want an outline on it at all, so I'll just set the outline to transparent. I'm just going to carefully draw the box so it's in the same colour as the background, so you won't see it. But anything moving down here will vanish underneath there, because this is getting stamped on top of the text. And I'm going to make sure this purple block is behind the frame. So if I run it now, you can't see anything peeking out from the bottom. So at this point, we have a leaderboard that may have 50 scores in it, and we can choose what position to show. But wouldn't it be nice if we could show the top of the leaderboard and then watch it scroll all the way to the bottom of the leaderboard and then all the way back up again? This is what we're going to achieve now. We're going to add another variable, and we're going to call it the current index displayed at top. And it's for this sprite only. When we first initialize the target index, we're going to set this value to be the same as the target. So it's going to start displaying exactly where we've told it to. So current index displayed at the top equals target index display at the top, which has just been set by the set target index custom block. And over in our show high scores, instead of using the target, I'm going to right click that and change it to and change it to current index. And similarly with the target there, I'm going to change that to current index. So at this point, nothing much has changed except I've copied target into current. But what I'm going to add now is called a state machine. I'm going to give it commands. I'm going to give it a command that says go to top, and it will scroll to the top of the high score table, a command that says go to bottom, and it will scroll to the bottom, and a command that says pause, which means it will pause at that value. So let's add, instead of using numbers for these commands, I'm actually going to use variables. I'm going to start it with an underscore, just so that it groups them all together. Go to top for this sprite only. I'm going to have a underscore go to bottom for this sprite only. We're going to have a underscore pause for this sprite only. I'm also going to need a variable to say what state it's in, whether it's going to the top, going to the bottom, or whatever it might be doing. So a state variable and a post pause state for reasons that will become apparent for this sprite only. So I'll just hide those from the screen, and then I'll set up the commands. So we have go to bottom, go to top, and pause. And we'll give those the numbers 0, 1 and 2. So now I've set up those, I need to set the state that we're going to start in. So I'm going to make another custom block, and I'm going to call it set scrolling state, and it's going to take one parameter, which I will call state. So let's put that down there. And in this custom state, we're going to set the state to whatever value we've passed in. So let's set state to the state that has been passed in, and then let's act accordingly depending on what the state is. So if the state is go to bottom, let's just put the variables in. If the state is, there it is, go to bottom, then we can set the target appropriately, set the target index to high score number, which is the number of entries in the high score table. I'm going to just duplicate this and drop it in there and say, by right clicking, change that to go to top. So if it's go to top, then I'll set the start index to 1, which is the top of the table. And I want to control how fast I move between these positions, the top of the table and the bottom of the table. So I'm going to add a variable called scroll speed for this sprite only. And in here, I'm going to set that variable up. So scroll speed, I'm going to set it to 0.1, and you can play around with this. You can make it scroll as fast or as slow as you want it to. And now, obviously, when I initialize, I need to set the first state. So let's set the scrolling state to make sure it starts at the top. So let's set the scrolling state to go to top. Now we're also going to have to make it act upon what state it's currently in. So let's add a block called update state. And at the moment we've got a pause state and a go to top and go to bottom. Now pause is going to be handled differently, so let's add an if else. And now if the state is paused, so state is pause, then we're going to want to do something different to scrolling. I'll come back to that. But if it's not paused, then let's see if the current state is less than the target, if the current index displayed at the top is less than the target index displayed at the top, because if it is, we need to update it. So let's add if else, and if the current position, the current index displayed at the top, if that is less than the target index displayed at the top, then we're going to want to change the current index. So change current index displayed at the top by, and this is where the scroll speed variable is going to come in. So let's take scroll speed and put it over there. And then we need to check whether we've finished this state. If we've actually reached the top, then we want to go to a different state. And then we need to make sure that we haven't gone past the target index. So we need to say if it's now greater than the target index. So we need to say if it's now greater than the target index, then just make sure it equals the target index. So set, that's an if first. So now if, or even easier, if I just add a not there, and I can copy this down, and then instead of being less than, it becomes, with the not there, it becomes greater or equal to. So if it's greater or equal to target index to display at top, then I'll make sure it's equal to it. So set current to duplicate that target. And then I'm going to have similar code in this else section, except it's going to be if current index is greater than, then I'm going to want it to scroll in the other direction. So if and a greater than. So this is always making sure the current index where we're currently displaying the leaderboard is scrolling in the correct direction. So if we're heading towards the bottom of the table or the top of the table. So if the current index is greater than the target, and I'll duplicate this, although I'll need to change some of it. Instead of changing by scroll speed, it's going to be the opposite direction. So 0 minus scroll speed. And I'll get that because it's not less than, it's not greater than now. Other than that, that should ensure it's clamped to the correct value. And then at the bottom, we'll say if the current value equals the target value, it means I've actually reached the top or the bottom. Then I want to move on to the next state. So I'm going to create yet another custom block called next state. And so if you've reached the top or the bottom, we'll go to next state. And in next state, which is hiding there, in next state, we're going to see what the next state should be. So if the state currently is go to bottom, I'll use an if else. If state equals go to the bottom, and I've reached that, then I want to change my state to go to top. So I'll simply set scrolling state to go to top. And I'll duplicate this because if the current state is go to the top and I've reached the top now, I'm going to set the state to go to bottom. And that should bounce between the top and the bottom of the high score table, hopefully. Let's have a quick look. And I do need to make sure I'm actually calling this update state so that it is updating the scrolling position. And I will do that over here where it's showing high scores. Before it shows the high scores, I will call update state. And I want to make sure I'm starting at the top of the table. So I'm not setting the target index to 25. I'm starting at the top. And now let's have a quick look in the game sprite. Because the way the game sprite was working is that it just shows the high scores and moves on to wait to play. In wait to play, it runs a loop, but it's not updating the high score table anymore in there. So instead of displaying the high score up there, I'll take that out. I'll delete that because now I want to broadcast, and it has to broadcast it every frame while it's looping. So that broadcast is going to be to show the high scores. And let's see how that works. Well, I can definitely see something scrolling there. It's very, very nice. Not entirely clear what it is. So I should just explain that it's not clearing the screen behind it as it's scrolling. So you're just seeing it all mashed together in a lump. I need to clear this area of screen. I could just clear the whole screen, but I want to just do this specifically for the high scores so it's not affecting anything else that might be going on in the game. And this is actually quite easy to do. If I go back into costumes for the high scores, and this is the area I want to clear, and I think I'm going to clear it to a dark red colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a rectangle again, or square, fill with no outline, just a colour. And I'm going to use the colour from behind the high scores, but I'm going to make it a bit darker. And then I'm going to draw a rectangle that will be over the area where the text is being displayed. So just like that. But obviously if I'm drawing that on top of the text, you're not going to see anything. So now what I'm going to do is copy that and then delete it, and create or paint a new costume which I'll call Leaderboard Wipe, and I will just paste. So now I have another costume I can paste to clear any text if I do it in the right order. So let's go back to the code, and let's have a look at this code. I've got a display frame there, and I want to add wipe leaderboard. So I'm going to actually just duplicate that, give it a new name, which is going to be wipe leaderboard, and it'll be a different costume. It's going to be leaderboard wipe. So this will just stamp the wipe to it. And so in the show high scores custom block, if I broadcast this before the text, so broadcast to wipe the any text that was previously there, and then draw the text, and then draw the frame on top of it, that should take care of that problem. And there we have it, the high score table scrolling all the way down. So it should get to the bottom, then wait, and then scroll back up again. Fingers crossed. The bottom of the table clearly needs initializing again. I'll have to check that in a moment. But yeah, bouncing between the top and the bottom. And that seems like a good place to draw this tutorial part to a close. And the next tutorial will finish this off completely. I hope you've enjoyed this session. If you have, please don't forget to follow the YouTube channel for RokCoder, and I'll see you next time.